So first of all, an introduction to Goldsmiths. We're a small arts-based college, so we specialise in sociological subjects and art-based subjects, design, and we have very few science-based subjects studied. We are about 8,500 students and a further 2,000 staff members. We are a majority undergraduate school, and we also have a majority of women students, about 65%. Which goes hand in hand with being a mostly arts-based institution, I think. I like to begin these sort of presentations, I guess, paying respects to the work that came before me. So back in 2010, the National Union of Students commissioned a piece of research that asked more than 2,000 women students about their experiences of sexual violence and sexual harassment. And it was the first sort of national piece of data that we had in the UK for universities, and it found that 1 in 7 women respondents had experienced serious physical or sexual assault whilst at university, and that 68% of women respondents had experienced some kind of physical or verbal harassment, either in or around their institution. So that's pretty high, and it was the first time we had an evidence base that this was happening. We kind of knew it was, but it was really important for us to have those facts. They followed up with a further piece of research in 2014 that demonstrated, this included men in this research, so this demonstrated that 1 in 3 respondents had had unwanted sexual comments about their body, so 12% of men, and then 37% of women. This research sparked interest by the national media, so we started actually getting responses from mostly newspaper sources like The Guardian, who picked up on individual cases and wanted to go to universities and find out what was happening. And this was very specific, I guess, to Goldsmiths in that we had a very public case in the news. So the Students' Union have done a really good job of documenting on their website a timeline of things that have happened since 2014 that have led to the time, work and investment that the university is now putting into this subject. So in the middle there, you'll see a feminist killjoy, which is, has anyone heard of the term feminist killjoy before? So it's this idea that you have to be that person that constantly points out that something's not acceptable as a feminist. So it's sort of being the party pooper, the person who, says actually that's a really sexist thing you just said. And it's sort of the labour of feminists to have to do that constantly, is the idea of being a feminist killjoy. That concept was created by an academic called Professor Sara Ahmed, who used to be the director of the Centre for Feminist Research at Goldsmiths. And that's an important point because she had a really active blog where she began to document the lack of response from Goldsmiths into staff to student sexual misconduct. It wasn't Sara alone. There were also a bunch of anonymous students and staff who created another blog called We Want Truth Goldsmiths, and those really created a very public narrative about a particular case that happened at Goldsmiths. That picked up a lot of press attention and led to a conference. So this one here up in this corner, the Sexual Harassment in Higher Education conference, was the first conference to look at sexual misconduct by staff towards students. And that was held in 2015. And as Monserrat said, I was working at UCL back then and attended as a guest. And it was very interesting to sort of see the narrative move from the research that NUS had done around student-to-student experiences over to sort of staff members being the people who were perpetrating these issues. And so that was the first sort of time that conversation happened. And out of that was born the 1752 group, who have commissioned lots of research since they were inaugurated. And yeah, I think we've got a copy of it right there. So yeah, they've done a lot of work around that power and abuse of power and how it's a very specific context to higher education. Universities are very hierarchical. We imbued this what we call the master and apprentice sort of relationship, where someone is all-knowing and someone is therefore sort of not, and it creates a real power imbalance that can be taken advantage of. And so this research that the 1752 group is really sort of looking at that power relationship in relation to this. So subsequently, Sarah Ahmed, who I've just mentioned, resigned from Goldsmiths very publicly over the issue and over the lack of response that the Goldsmiths had taken around this issue. And that really sparked, again, a lot of media interest. And the university at that time was beginning to start making some steps towards addressing these things. So in 2016, the college finally sort of publicly recognised that it had an issue, and this has informed our campaign. So we use the term sexual harassment happens here in recognition that it does, but also we talk about sexual harassment ending here too, in that we're trying to make sure that we can eradicate it and that we can do something about it. Later that year, we produced a 10-point plan. So this was the first piece of commitment in context, I guess, to that plan. This was produced by the deputy head of the university and covered a whole range of things. So the appointment of a dedicated role, so that was the creation of my post as a strategy and review manager. A definition of what we meant by sexual harassment. So there's a legal definition, but we decided to go over and above the legal definition. Establishing an advisory board, which I'll talk about in more detail. Reporting options, staff training and a new policy. Working with our communities and partners was really important as well. And also we wanted to be at the forefront of the higher education response. We wanted to be setting an agenda and leading by example. That sort of marked a big financial commitment and a political commitment for the institution as well, because those things don't just happen. They need money and resources and time. So the Sexual Harassment Advisory Board was set up to steer that work. So in its first year, it met every month. And these are all the different parts of the organisation who are members. So I'm a member as part of strategy and planning. We had a senior manager, so our deputy head of the university, Elizabeth Hill, chair that. The Students' Union are represented on there. Our campus trade unions are on there. Student support services, human resources, and communications teams. So really broad range of staff and political representatives on that steering group. Another important thing I felt to mention was that the legal guidance changed in the UK. So in 2017, they reviewed a piece of guidance that dated back to 1994. This was called the Zellick Report at the time. It suggested that universities should not investigate anything that could constitute a criminal offence. That meant that when someone told us something that could be seen as criminal, we said, not anything to do with us, you need to go to the police, and until you go to the police, there's nothing we can do about it. Which is really problematic for this topic, because we know that the criminal justice system doesn't service survivors well. Very few people choose to report to the police, and when they do, they have very little success actually leading to a conviction or any kind of outcome that they may see as positive. So it wasn't preferable to have a system where we said we're not going to do anything about it unless you go and use this imperfect process over here through the criminal justice system. So the new guidance in 2017 said that universities could investigate things that may constitute a criminal offence. If the criminal proceedings are ongoing, our investigations are paused, but we can put in temporary actions such as suspensions or limiting movement around campus for people. But we obviously try and limit the impact it has on their work or study as much as possible. However, if there is no criminal investigation happening, we can investigate ourselves. Our findings aren't criminal. Our findings are based on the contracts that we have with students and staff. So we may find that they've breached their contract, but it gives us more opportunity to actually address the issues and respond to them in a way that we didn't before. That said, this is a real big change for universities. It provides us with a lot more responsibility, and I think across the entirety of the UK, universities are still working out how they do this, and they do it well. And it's certainly a focus point for us in 2018-19 is what we do with our investigations. But I thought that was a really important kind of context. So over the course of the last couple of years, we've done a lot, and working in partnership with various parts of the university has been really important. So working really closely with our Students' Union. And you can see we've created new policies, staff training and a new reporting tool. And the Students' Union have endorsed that policy. They've got a political timeline of all of the work that came before. And they also have been running active bystander training. So they've been engaging with students on how to support this topic. I wanted to address some of the things that are in our new policy. So this came into being in 2017, January 2017. And it's the first time that we have, as an institution, have communicated these expectations of our staff, students and visitors. Sadly, we live in an era where we need to state that someone should not perpetrate sexual violence, harassment or misconduct. That gives us recourse for when they do. We ask people to seek enthusiastic consent, so being absolutely sure that they got consent for any activity that they take part in. We also ask people to act appropriately in the work and study environment as well. We ask people to be more active bystanders, intervening when they can and feel safe to, and then responding in a thoughtful and supportive way to disclosures. We had a lot of issues where members of staff would hear disclosures and sort of make the situation worse potentially by either holding all of the responsibility for that disclosure or not necessarily believing the person who was telling them. Other key things within the policy were around being clear on our definitions, ensuring that students and staff have support when they experience these things, looking at our disclosures and reporting processes, and also with the general data protection regulations that came into effect in May, we've really had to think about confidentiality and information sharing as well. And obviously this is a very sensitive topic. So if we're collecting data on it, we need to be really sure that we're holding it very safely and not allowing it to sort of circulate around the university unnecessarily. So definitions, we defined these terms. There are legal definitions for each of these. We've, in many of the cases, taken the exact legal definition and sometimes gone further than the legal definition. So a good example of that is with regards to sexual harassment. So in law in the UK, someone has to intended to have caused harm. In our own policy, that intention is not required. If it is caused harm, that's sufficient to look at an investigation. We've invested a lot of money in student support. So my role was created and it was used to match fund £50,000 from a government initiative, which allowed us to recruit an additional member of our student wellbeing team and to ensure that all of that team, the majority of them, have been on an intensive 6-day training course on how to be sexual violence liaison officers. And they are a fantastically trained and prepared team now who are very equipped to support students who've experienced sexual violence either on campus or outside of the university, in fact. The majority of the cases that are coming through are usually a person that is not associated with the university, but it's having an impact on that student's ability to study. And they're getting specialised support and being referred to specialist external services through that team. Within our new disclosure and reporting processes, we're trying to foster a culture of belief. One of the biggest issues around sexual violence is people not believing someone when they tell them. And so for our frontline services, for those initial disclosures, we want the person who's receiving the disclosure to trust that the person is telling the truth. That's very separate from our sort of justice systems in that investigations are ran on a much more impartial basis, but the person receiving that initial disclosure would never be the person investigating the issue anyway. So we keep those two things very separate, and it allows that disclosure process and that support process to come from a place of belief, which we know is one of the most important things for survivors of sexual violence. And as I mentioned before, confidentiality around the data protection regulations has been really important. So we're really clearly describing why we have the data, how it's recorded, where we store it, how it's used and when it will be deleted. We're also really clear that confidentiality isn't about holding things entirely to yourself, that they may need to be processed within the university, but that can be done very sensitively and only passed on to the people who need to know. And that is about setting boundaries with people and saying to them, I'm not going to be able to hold this to myself. I may have to tell my supervisor that this information. I'm going to play a video now. So we purchased a new online reporting system called Report and Support. And I'm going to play a video that shows you how the website works.
Support. As part of Goldsmiths Against Sexual Violence, this website has been created for Goldsmiths students, staff and visitors to provide support information and as a platform for reporting experiences relating to sexual violence, sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. There is a huge amount of information provided on our support pages that is tailored to different experiences. This information is intended to provide options for you to choose the kind of support you would like to access. You can choose from services delivered within Goldsmiths, Lewisham, London, or from organisations that work nationally and even internationally in some cases. You can also find more information about Goldsmiths' policies and procedures in relation to sexual violence, sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. The campaigns section is where you can find out information about how Goldsmiths is working to challenge and change cultures of violence and harassment on campus. As a reporting platform, there are two ways you can input information. Either anonymously, where you will not be asked any personal information and your report can remain completely anonymous, or with contact information so you can get a response from Goldsmiths. If you wish to access support services or would like to request the college to take action against an individual or group, you are advised to fill in the report with contact details. Filling in an anonymous report may be the right thing for you at this time. It's important to note that doing so is unlikely to initiate any formal response or action from Goldsmiths. The information gathered from anonymous reports will be used to monitor issues. In order to prevent these things from happening, it is important that we better understand the extent to which they affect the Goldsmiths community. You will be asked 7 questions in the anonymous report. The first is whether you are reporting on behalf of yourself or someone else. The next question is about your connection to Goldsmiths. Question 3 asks you to select the descriptions that are most relevant to your report. You can click on the question mark for a brief definition of each option. The square boxes mean that you can select more than one option. If you select Other, a free text box appears for you to write in. Question 4 is where you can provide free text details of your report. This is optional but recommended. If you wish for the report to remain entirely anonymous, you should avoid including any identifiable information in this section. When a member of staff or a student is named or is identifiable within a report, the college will seek to take appropriate action. This will normally include notifying the person as soon as is reasonably practical. There are exceptions to this approach, specifically where it may not be safe or appropriate to inform an accused party. You can read further details of these exceptions in our support pages. Question 5 asks if there are any factors relevant to your report from a list of protected characteristics. You can select as many as are relevant or none if that is the case. Question 6 asks which area of Goldsmiths you are connected to. Question 7 is an equality monitoring page and is optional. Each question also has the option to select prefer not to say. We collect this information to better understand different people's experiences and to inform future work. The report is now ready to send. You will be asked to confirm that you consent to Goldsmiths processing the information you have provided in line with the privacy notice, which you can access at any time from the bottom runner of the website. Reporting with contact details is very similar to reporting anonymously. The key differences are that by choosing this option, you are indicating that you would like a response. This may include the organisation taking action where required. You can request within the form to speak to someone about the support and resolution options available to you. You will be asked to input your personal information. Remember that by providing information that names or identifies an individual who works or studies at Goldsmiths, that this will likely lead to the college taking appropriate action, which will normally include notifying the person as soon as is reasonably practical, whilst also considering where it may not be safe or appropriate to inform someone if they have been accused. Complete each question as you click through. Remember, squares mean that you can select multiple options. Question 8, you'll be asked to select your desired outcome. As detailed in the policy and procedures on sexual violence, sexual harassment and sexual misconduct, there may be circumstances where the college is required to take action, even if the person reporting is not requesting any. You can choose to leave this blank, select one or both. The final question asks you to provide contact information so Goldsmiths can respond to your report. Please fill in as much as you feel comfortable. You will be asked to confirm that you consent to Goldsmiths processing the information you have provided in line with the privacy notice. Goldsmiths aims to respond within 5 working days.
So that's a walkthrough video that we created for Report and Support, which is an external website that we purchased. University of Manchester originally designed it for reporting issues around bullying, harassment, sexual violence, and we were the second university to go live with it, and I think now 10 universities in the UK and some other sectors are beginning to purchase the system. And so yeah, we're very happy with what we've seen as a result, which has been a huge increase in the numbers of reports that we're getting, both anonymous and reports with contact details. As we said in the video, we're limited to what we can do usually if they're anonymous reports, but the ones with contact details often lead to some form of action or investigation. And we're about to put together our first annual report of the figures that we've received through that reporting process. So they should be live by the end of the term, so we're looking for December to publicly put those out, which is exciting because we want to be honest about the increase that we've seen, because we think that's a positive thing. Often the stories have been that where there are cases that's bad, but actually we know these things are happening in universities all over the globe, and actually us knowing about them and being able to respond to them effectively is success, in my opinion. So in order to, I guess, facilitate the policy and the work that we've been doing around that, it was important for us to talk about our staff training that we deliver. So we made a concerted effort to go out and speak to as many staff members face-to-face as possible. We've done the training in partnership with our local rape crisis centre, so frontline services this is their bread and butter work. They do this every day, all day. So we produced 3 different formats for the training. So one is a 90-minute briefing, very much like this. People sit in a lecture theatre and we kind of talk at them. One is a half-day session that our managers, senior tutors and security staff take part in. That's more interactive. It's done as a workshop. There's times where they can talk as groups and then talk as in smaller pairs and so on. And then we do a full-day session as well for staff who are responsible in that crisis response, who are most likely to receive disclosures or who are involved in the strategic planning and work around this. All of our senior management team have attended the training, which we're really pleased about. Yeah, we ran 24 sessions in 2017-18, and we have a further 10 scheduled for this academic year. Some of the successes has been that we've trained more than 50% of our staff. So over 1,000 members of staff have been to the face-to-face training. Most of them are the 90-minute blocks. We've collected feedback from the majority of the people who've attended, and we've had really good responses with about 4.5 out of 5, and nearly 90%, so between 80 and 90% of staff would recommend the training. So we're really happy with that. Some of the challenges have been recording and reporting the numbers attending. We don't have a system in place for that, so we've had to sort of create one for this. And attendance from specific groups. So that is, we're finding the hourly paid staff aren't coming because they are not getting extra pay to attend, so it's reasonable that they wouldn't. So we're looking at trying to get some funding from the institution to pay hourly paid lecturers and technical staff to come to those sessions. The training contents are mostly delivered by Rape Crisis, and it really focuses on dispelling myths around rape and sexual violence. We run it in different formats throughout the training, and we think it's really important to unpick those deeply held beliefs that people have that are usually wrong. And the other really central part of the training is around consent. So we have a really good legal definition of consent in the UK in our Sexual Offences Act 2003 that's about having the choice and freedom and capacity to make that choice. So we press that definition because it's very clear and very good. And we start to unpick what we mean by freedom and capacity. So we talk about people being sure that they have nothing bad would happen to them. So an academic example of that was that their grades wouldn't be affected if they said no. And then capacity, we usually talk about things such as drugs and alcohol or mental health issues within that. We train staff around receiving disclosures. So in an ideal world, students and staff members would go to our specialist teams or specialist services, but the reality is that people will tell someone they trust, and that could be anyone in the university. So we want them to feel prepared in receiving that disclosure. Again, coming back to the point around it being receiving in good faith, that someone is telling the truth. And then listening non-judgmentally and signposting is really important because they're not a specialist. They shouldn't be holding the responsibility. They should be helping that person get to specialist services. Furthermore, we want them to be clear on what their confidentiality responsibilities are. We're also clear that you shouldn't report on someone else's behalf to the police. So when someone's experienced sexual violence, they've had their power and their agency taken away from them. And if you report on their behalf to an external agency that's going to then potentially engage them in a really difficult criminal justice process, that really continues to take the agency away from the individual. So we try and retain that agency with the individual if they choose to be involved in a criminal proceeding. And lastly, we ask staff to document disclosures that they receive, and that can be done with very little information. So I'm an academic and I received a disclosure from a student. Is as much information as we need, but we just want to count the numbers. And then lastly, coming on to our student training. So we've managed to engage a huge number of staff in the project, but student training's been a little bit more difficult. We ran an amazing pilot programme through the Students' Union last year, between January and May. And we purchased, and this year now, from October onwards, we've been rolling out the confirmed programme. We purchased a curriculum from the University of New Hampshire, which is based in the United States. They've been doing intervention training for more than 10 years, and it's really well evaluated academically. So we were really happy to purchase that programme, and we will adapt it to your own specific context. And we have peer facilitators deliver it, so students deliver the training to students. The content of the training looks at identifying behaviours on a continuum of violence, developing empathy for those who've experienced violence, actually practically practising safe and appropriate intervention skills, and committing to intervene before, during and after an incident occurs. We're really trying to create a community of responsibility with this training and help students feel partly responsible for ending sexual violence. Although we're very clear within the training that the responsibility ultimately always lies with the perpetrator and that they are the people who are the cause of the issue, but we're asking as many people as possible to help be the solution. So within the pilot scheme, we looked at the curriculum to make sure it would fit Goldsmiths. So we talk about things such as being in studios at the end of year degree shows, because these are the things that are relevant to our students rather than talking about necessarily classrooms, because some of our students don't ever really have work in a classroom. We looked at best formats for student engagement, a sustainable way of administering the scheme, what training and support was needed for a peer-to-peer model, and then looking at how we could grow the training. So since October, we have had 10 training sessions in October, but there'll be 20 plus throughout this term. Last year, 70 students attended across the entire period of 5 months. This year, 80 students have been trained in just 1 month. So we're looking to get many more students trained this year. We've had some really positive student feedback on the training. They really liked how we included examples that looked at intersectionality, so looked at those cross referencing experiences, and one really great example was looking at people who have darker skin, so people who are like Black, African, Asian heritage might not show up with bruises as easily, and that's actually really contextual information that was appreciated in the presentations. Looking at same-sex relationships within that context as well, so really thinking about those intersections between sexual violence and other forms of oppression. And the student trainers have been amazing at applying those examples. And then the feedback we've had that's been a bit more critical is about our level of engagement. The training sessions haven't been as well attended as we hoped, so trying to get more people in the room is key. And these are some of the measures that we are looking at around success. So we've trained and we've trained 8 student facilitators who are incredible, and they all have got a variety of different backgrounds and experiences and bring lots to the training room, and they really do an amazing job of delivering those sessions. We originally set a target of 2,500 of our students to be trained. I'm not sure we're going to meet that target, but we're going to keep pushing along to get as many students there as possible. And yeah, the other thing is that getting strong evaluations back from those sessions so we know what we can improve and keep working on. So all of that leads me to what are we doing in the future. And we've just written a 3-year strategy and delivery plan. That is looking at these particular objectives. So we're looking to eradicate sexual violence from the university, through continuing our staff and student training, partnerships, policies and procedures, and better understanding people's experiences. So we've done lots of this work now, but we want to dive into the more specific details of what people are actually experiencing on our campus and how it's specific to Goldsmiths. I mentioned before, we're doing lots of work around our investigation procedures, and we're also looking at how do we reach people who work with the university who aren't necessarily directly employed by the university. So we're working with our procurement team to look at how we brief people that might be coming onto campus for shorter periods of time but have lots of interaction with our staff and students. There's a whole host of things that we're looking to do and engage with our local community a bit more on the topic as well. And then my last slide is in relation to, we won some funding last year from the British Academy Small Grants projects to do an extended literature review of all of the research into staff to student sexual misconduct that's happened. And I think this will be circulated, but this link here is where 72 different academic articles have been documented in one place. And it's a hugely helpful resource, I think, for finding out more on this topic that some of our academics put together this year, which we're hugely proud of. So yeah, kind of going to stop. Yeah, if you want to write it down. Sorry. Yeah. And that's everything I've got to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so very much, Vicky. It's been great and even more intense, your program, than we thought. Let's have now a discussion about the issues that you've raised. So anyone who wants to start with questions, suggestions? Go, Mark, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's really interesting and it's a huge program. My question is, if this program you have deals only with sexual harassment, not with other kind of or types of harassment, like for example mobbing, or because the procedure we have here at the University of Cantabria covers a broader field, or you have separate programs just to deal with different problems at your university?
Yes and no. So we again, I'll repeat the question actually, I think. So do we include other forms of harassment in our work at Goldsmiths? Yeah. There's been some funding that we've received to do some work around hate crime. So there's a separate project happening around hate crime, and we're a hate crime reporting centre at Goldsmiths. But I'd say we're ahead of the curve on this work compared to some of the broader harassment and bullying more around other protected characteristics. That's because this is just where the focus has been primarily at the moment. We do have staff bullying and harassment policy, and that sits within our human resources team. And there's a grievance policy, and we sort of have all of our formalities in place to respond to those issues, but we haven't proactively done as much work on, say, race-related harassment or disability or anything like that. Yeah. But other universities have included it within. So, for example, in Report and Support, Manchester, who designed the programme, they use it for other forms of harassment as well. But we've kept our scope, my scope, pretty narrow. Yeah.
Thank you. So, other questions? Opinions?
Yes, well, thanks a lot for your talk, and the program is excellent. I guess in fact, I'm quite intrigued by something about the tension between confidentiality and the criminal offences. How do you have any experience on that? There has been some hot issues about that thing.
We haven't as yet, under the new guidance, had to provide any information to the criminal justice system, as far as I'm aware. That doesn't mean that the police don't try and ask us for the information. But we have a university lawyer who is very good at saying, show me the evidence as to why I should give you this. We're very careful at protecting people's information. But we are also mindful when we are storing and retaining this information that it could get called in as evidence, but that has to go through particular processes within the legal justice system, and sometimes police officers will just try and ask us for information that we're not compelled to give them, so we don't.
Yeah. But obviously you got a very strong legal support.
Yeah. Yeah.
More questions? I was wondering one thing, you talk a little at the end about the future, no? So the idea is to keep working intensely.
That's a good question.
On the training part, or?
Yeah, I think it's a balance between working intensely and embedding the work as part of the everyday, what we call business as usual. So this has been a sort of one-off project for the last 2 years, and my job now, I'm fixed term, so my job finishes at the university in October 2019, and so my job now is to make sure that teams really embed this work within their day-to-day. It's part of their budgets, that they're paying for the services that we are buying in, such as the website, such as the training programs, because we pay Rape Crisis to deliver the training. Making sure that that's just a standard part of their budgets that they're submitting every year, rather than it coming from a central pot. Making sure that they're feeling briefed on how to work with the training providers, and making sure that they're continuing to do that work. So I think it's required a larger amount of energy at the beginning. But yeah, certainly a question that we come back to time and time again is about sustainability and making sure that the work continues, but it will be probably on a slightly scaled down, but hopefully therefore sustainable in the longer term. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I understood you well, but you mean that that every unit buys is committed to also buying the training and paying for it?
Our training is coordinated by our learning and development team, so it's an essential service within the university. So that is based within human resources. So they would be committed to paying for the training, rather than it sitting in the strategic planning team. Yeah, and that would just be a standard thing that they purchase every year, or review, or continue to invest in.
Okay. So.
Speaking about the distance between the legal procedure in cases of the circumstances became a criminal act or something like that. And I guess that probably the entrance, the door to know about the topic could be the university institutions. whatever. But afterwards, when the case came to the court, in that cases, I think it's very delicate because you have to choose going ahead within the university procedures or just wait up to the result of the legal procedures. What to do in that case is because sometimes you want to avoid the situation. In the end, you have not the legal authority to do that because in cases of crime, which are the most relevant and the most painful for the parties, it's not so easy how to make the decision going ahead and stopping the case. How to do it?
Yeah, it's challenging to manage whether there's an internal investigation or a criminal proceeding, and it's new for all universities in the UK and there isn't a lot of precedent. So we're each finding our way as cases come up. But we guess we're trying to do our best by the parties involved, so making sure they feel fully informed about what it means to go to the police and make a report. It's a difficult process. It can take up to 2 years for like a rape case to go through the criminal justice system, and they can bring in evidence from all over. So specialist services such as rape crisis wouldn't recommend counselling while someone's going through a criminal justice system, for example, because those counselling notes could be subpoenaed, and that's not the word we use in English, is it? Those, but too many American TV shows. Those could be called into evidence and then used to dispute the reliability of witness. So it's a very specialist thing, and we have something called independent sexual violence advocates, and similarly for domestic violence as well, who can advise people on how the criminal justice system works and what they'll need to do in order to engage with that. Ultimately, we want people to feel really informed, and it means that when people feel informed about how difficult the criminal justice system is to engage with, they often choose not to, which means we then have means as an institution to investigate. If we've been informed of something and the criminal process is ongoing, we can take what we call precautionary action. So that's usually limiting the person's access around campus to either the person who is reported, or to their studies. So we may choose to suspend someone's studies until next year if that criminal proceeding is going to take that long, or they might be on a temporary exclusion that's reviewed every week, or it might be that they can only use certain parts of the campus. We try best to live by the principle of as little impact as possible on either party's education or employment. But the reality is that we also need to protect our staff and students in those situations. So it's totally an ongoing balancing act, I think, around people's legal rights and people's safety.
Well, I also had something. I was wondering whether you have something more to say about this culture of shift, no? That you are trying to cultural shift that you are trying to reach, no? Do you have any measure for it?
Yeah.
How do you face the challenge?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to measure culture, and colleagues at Sussex are very clear. They do a big, huge piece of work around cultural change, and they run these workshops where they bring people together to very heavily debate particular topics. And they are very clear that it's not a measurable project, and that they know it will have a positive impact because conversations inform people's decision making, but it's very hard to document that. I guess for us, we're measuring it through the training that we're doing with staff. We know that that the training sessions have increased people's knowledge and people's confidence. And we know that when people are more familiar with this topic and the potential negative impacts that certain myths being perpetuated can have on an individual, that then if they're more knowledgeable about not recreating those, it's going to have an impact on making it an easier environment for people to disclose that they've experienced these things, access support, and potentially go through more formal resolution options. So yeah, I guess my answer is we don't have a particular measure for culture, but we know that that training and those conversations is going to be shifting the narrative, which is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, because you mentioned that you were happy when there were reports, because the number of reports has definitely increased.
Mm-hmm. Hugely.
And that you thought that was a measure of something changing, no?
Yeah, exactly. And there's a shift in people's trust in the institution. We try and be clear about the expectations that people should have around what we can realistically do in response. But certainly people, I think, recognise, an increase in reports shows that people recognise that the college takes these things seriously, and that there are things we can do to support them and to try to look into whether they happen or not and follow our formal proceedings. Yeah.
But that's the culture of belief that you
Exactly,
are
yeah.
investing very much as a crucial issue for people feeling confident about telling their experiences to the institution. No?
Yeah, and we know that's still a very small proportion of the things that are happening to people are actually being reported, and sometimes lots of the research that's been done in this topic, one of the number one reasons why people don't report is because they don't think the thing that happened to them is serious enough, which is why spending so long on writing definitions of these things was really important. Actually naming things like someone making comments about your sex life as sexual harassment wasn't in the public narrative before. And I think one of the things that's been super helpful for us in terms of that culture shift, and one of the reasons why it's very difficult to measure culture, is we can't say that it was only our actions that have influenced culture change. Like the media and the huge campaigns like Time's Up, Me Too, all of those sort of big social media campaigns that have happened that we know our students and staff have been engaging with, we can't say that it was purely us. We know that that's had an impact on creating conversations and growing understanding about what constitutes sexual harassment, sexual violence and domestic violence too. And allowing people to see that these things are serious and that they will be taken seriously if we're told about it.
More questions, suggestions?
Yeah, I would like to say yes that the option to report your case online, I think it's a brilliant idea, because I think that people fear, it's difficult for people going to other people and tell your case, and sometimes you're shy or you are afraid of not being believed, and just writing online I think you've realized that this is a way of encouraging people to report their cases. I mean, you think this has improved the number or increased the number of reports?
Yeah, hugely for students especially. Staff aren't engaging with the online reporting tool as much, and where they do, it's often about broader things actually. So we're getting quite a lot of like more bullying and harassment cases coming through, even though that's not really originally what the process was designed for. But students are massively engaging with it. We're hearing from a lot more students than we used to about the experiences that they're having. I guess online platforms are more appealing to our student base. It's what they are used to engaging with, and we think there's one of the values of report and support is that it's integrated with all of the support information that people need as well. So you can go on there and report, and then the links pop up at the end that say, do you know about these support services if you've experienced domestic violence? And you can go and look at specialist services in relation to that. I think it, especially around being able to report anonymously, gives people the confidence that they can get their voice heard, that they don't have to engage in visiting a particular person or going through any formal proceedings. Yeah.
Good, really good. Also because it is very simple and clear, and you don't need to afford much information. Just click in there. This is great.
Yeah, and lots of universities in the UK have begun to explore this. Lots of them are using report and support, but some have designed their own sort of online forms. And Cambridge is an example who have an online form, but you can't put any details in it. So it's just, I've experienced this. It doesn't say who or when or where. It's just someone yelled at me from their car window whilst I was walking past campus, and you could just put that. And it allows us to start building a picture of what's actually happening amongst our staff and students. So yeah, I think it's helpful for that purpose especially. Yeah.
More questions? No? Then perhaps it's time to thank you very much for your work and for coming here.
Oh, you're very welcome.
To teach us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks very much.